session. So good afternoon, everybody. As I said, my name is David Plum. My role here is just to facilitate. Today, I'm going to throw some things on the screen right now as well. Hang on one second. Um, so the Vermont Climate Council is in the process of updating Vermont's climate action plan. And that work of getting into the details is the responsibility of subcommittees of the Vermont Climate Council to make recommendations. Subcommittees are in the middle of that process, and we're holding a number of public input sessions like today's on different topics that are the core topics of this update. Today's session is on transportation, as you can see, and as you know. I'm going to turn it over to one of the subcommittee leads who's going to walk us through with colleagues an initial presentation. And after that initial presentation, we're going to spend the rest of our time together, which is 90 minutes, I think, and just having a conversation. Now, there are 60 or so folks on the call. So when it's time for that conversation, I'll say a few things about how we'll handle ourselves with 60 of us on a Zoom call together. So expect about 15, 20 minutes of presentation now. And then the rest of our time is just having a discussion about what you're seeing and providing some input to this subcommittee as it finishes up its work of making recommendations to Vermont's Climate Council. So for that, Andrea Wright, let me turn it over to you. I'll let you introduce yourself and start off the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. And thanks to everyone here for joining us this afternoon. As David said, I'm Andrea Wright. I'm the Environmental Policy Manager at the Agency of Transportation. I also am a member of the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, and I co-chair the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to go over a few slides to really just ground everyone in the work of the Council and the subcommittee, all the subcommittees really, as well as what the Transportation Task Group is laying out. As most of you, oh, sorry, next slide I'm supposed to say. As most of you know, in 2020, the Vermont State Legislature passed Act 153, the Global Warming Solutions Act, which called for cutting climate pollution and created legally binding emission reduction requirements. But it also focused on developing resilience in the built and natural environments. So the Global Warming Solutions Act also required the creation of the Vermont Climate Council and charged them with developing a climate action plan to serve as a roadmap to meet the GWSA objectives. The Global Warming Solutions Act called for the establishment of subcommittees, and ultimately 5 subcommittees were established, and they developed pathways, strategies, and actions to address emissions reductions, to address resilience, and then also carbon sequestration. And the Global Warming Solutions Act called for that climate action plan to be updated every 4 years. So a revised plan is due by July 1st, 2025. And that's the work before us and has been before us for the better part of this year and what we're here to talk to you all about today. Next slide. This is the one that you're going to have to click a bunch of times, okay? So I mentioned the Climate Council and the subcommittees. There are 3 drafting subcommittees. There's the Cross-Sector Mitigation, the Rural Resilience and Adaptation, and Ag and Ecosystems. We all began meeting as subcommittees in early spring. Early on, it was about understanding the process and the roadmap for this update. Throughout the early spring and summer, subcommittees and task groups really started to dig in deeper into the 2021 plan, started looking for gaps in the existing recommendations. We were looking to understand what progress had been made on the recommendations from the 2021 plan. We met with and heard from subject matter experts and implementers, and then by late summer really defined those gaps that needed to be filled. The task groups have been meeting about every other week since late summer, working to draft revised, updated, and new pathways, strategies, and actions. The goal is to provide the subcommittee recommendations to the full council by the end of the year. But it's important to note that subcommittees are just advisory to the council. The council is ultimately the body that's going to adopt the final recommendations and the plan. So over the winter and into early spring of next year, the council will work to revise the plan, determining which recommendations to move forward and also to prioritize, editing the narrative to match the revisions identified by the subcommittees, and then ultimately having a final revised plan by that July 1st, 2025. There has been engagement and outreach throughout the process. The Climate Action Office really supporting the bulk of that, which started with public kickoff meetings for the revision of the plan in early spring. Now here we are with a really critical point in receiving this stakeholder input. There are a series of 8 input sessions across different subcommittees subject matter, and those will be concluded this month. And then the council will go out for further input in the early spring when a draft of the revised plan is ready for sharing. Next slide.
Oops.
So the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee is charged with identifying the most cost-effective, feasible strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to bring us in line with the requirements set forth in the Global Warming Solutions Act. The committee had defined task groups from the drafting of the initial climate action plan and did not choose to create any new task groups. Those task groups aligning with various sectors, so the transportation, buildings and thermal, electricity, and then the non-energy. The subcommittee has had a pretty steady membership throughout. So the task groups were already are really largely the same people who wrote the initial climate action plan. We do have some new members, great additions to the teams. But that really allowed the subcommittee to really hit the ground running. And so we have a lot to share with you, and we'll go through that today. That's our intent here. Next slide. So this is our task group membership. We have several council members on our task group, an environmental organizations rep, a member with expertise in energy data and analysis, and a member representing Vermont manufacturers. We also have a liaison from the Just Transition Subcommittee, helping to guide the work as it's developed, and then a couple of state staff members who are overseeing a lot of the implementation of the recommendations from the 2021 plan and guiding those actions that are going to be new for the next update. Next slide. So today, of course, we're focusing in on reducing transportation emissions, looking to do that most equitably and affordably. The 2021 Climate Action Plan included actions that called for replacing carbon-intensive fuels with lower carbon or zero emission fuels. It addressed vehicle efficiency with actions that support the transition to electric vehicles across light, medium, and heavy-duty fleets. It spoke to making the transportation system more efficient and accessible by providing modal options. You'll hear a lot more about what the task group has been considering for the 2025 update from several different members. And that's really why we're here today. But first, I'll turn it over to Jared for some context setting.
Thanks, Andrea. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jared Duval. I'm one of the appointed members of the Vermont Climate Council, appointed to provide expertise in energy and data analysis. So as Andrea said, I'm just going to provide a little bit of context, especially around the transportation sector. This graph on the right puts it in context with our other energy sectors in terms of energy use, emissions, and the amount of money that Vermonters spend on it. So transportation is our second largest source of energy use, 41% of all energy use in Vermont, but it is our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, 39% of statewide climate pollution in Vermont, as most recently inventoried in 2021 by the Agency of Natural Resources. 39% came from the transportation sector. And that's primarily because it is currently so fossil fuel dependent. About 95% of fuel use in the transportation sector is currently fossil fuel, primarily gasoline and diesel. And for Vermonters' budgets, in terms of the amount of money that is spent on energy, 45%, nearly half, goes to transportation. And that is just the fuel cost. That does not account for vehicles or maintenance. Next slide. In Vermont, our transportation emissions are our highest source, and they are also very high regionally. This has a lot to do with our settlement pattern and the fact that in Vermont, we on average drive more vehicle miles per year than residents of any other state. And so you can see here the kind of per capita emissions that come from the transportation sector. And Vermont is the second highest in the Northeast. So this is a particular challenge in terms of climate pollution and costs here for Vermonters. Next slide, please. And then just want to set some context in terms of cost comparisons. We're going to hear a lot in the draft recommendations and want to get your input in terms of electrification of the vehicle fleet. And we can see here that over time, the on average higher costs and greater price volatility of gasoline and diesel, how those compare to electricity, both just in terms of an average rate, which you see in that green line, but then also in terms of dedicated specific electric vehicle rates, which are even lower, and you can see those in those green dots. So that's just one aspect of costs. There's a lot more that goes into that. But we wanted to provide that as one example of, as we look to not just, if we were to simplify our goals with the climate action plan, it is to cut pollution while cutting costs. And this is an example of one of those potential, if we get it right, win-win opportunities to help folks move away from high cost and price volatile energy towards lower cost energy that can also help us reduce emissions. I'm going to put in the chat, we mostly want to hear from you today, so I'm going to end right now, but I want to put in the chat some additional information that has a more comprehensive overview of Vermont's transportation sector as a section in the recently released Energy Action Network Annual Progress Report for Vermont. So all of these graphs that we just showed come from that, and there's a lot more in there for anyone who may be interested. But with that, I am going to pass it off to our next presenter.
Great. Joey, is that you?
Sure is. I just need to unmute. Thanks, Jared. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're great. I was just saying, introduce yourself. Thanks.
Oh, Jane, you have a question?
I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a member who's having trouble with the ASL channel. And so just wanted to pause the presentation to see if Charlotte or anybody's able to help before we go too far.
Great. I'm not seeing that right now. So I can say quickly, and then please reach out to Charlotte through a text. Or maybe I'll put this in the chat myself. How about I'll drop instructions in the chat while you're talking, Joey.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was asking.
Sure.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Yeah, again, Johanna Miller. I'm the environmental appointed representative to the Vermont Climate Council. I work for the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and I am helping to lead the Transportation Task Group. Thank you all so much for being here today. We really do, as others have said, want to lean into the tremendous expertise that is on this call, both lived and professional, and a combination thereof. So really looking to spend some time digging into this with you all. But just before sort of really dig in, I think we all know there are three primary things that drive fossil fuel consumption in the transportation sector. It relates to our travel patterns and the distance between the places that we need to go, sort of our land use and settlement patterns. It relates to the vehicles that we drive, So we need vehicles that need to be less polluting. We're going to talk a lot about that when it comes to more clean electric vehicles, and it relates to the fuels that are in our vehicles. So looking to sort of reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels that are in the vehicles that we drive if they are not electric. So to do that, our committee, our Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee in the task group has really focused on 3 overarching pathways in those general buckets. A pathway is just like a high-level means of achieving our goals. And then the strategies are sort of statements of measurable activity or benchmarks to help achieve a pathway. And then you'll see in the adopted climate action plan, but we have not laid those out here, but we also wanted to get into a level of detail and get your thoughts today about the specific actions, the operational tasks that we're going to need to advance or deploy to achieve the pathways and the strategies. So we really welcome your input on all of these things. And I'm going to speak to the first 2 pathways and then turn it over to Andrea, who is going to talk to you about the 3rd pathway. Next slide, please. So the first pathway being vehicle electrification and efficiency. This is really all about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, climate pollution, carbon pollution from our vehicles. And so this is really looking to lean into electrification. And this pathway, this slide is really focused on sort of the vehicles themselves and the incentives for them. And the strategy number 1 is sort of establishing vehicle emission standards. In the initial climate action plan we adopted, we recommended joining the Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks program through in partnership with California, which has been enabled through a waiver to have more stringent vehicle emission standards than federal standards. So Vermont has joined on to Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. We're recommending maintaining and monitoring compliance with that and exploring advanced clean fleets, which is another component of the California program. I would note that it is a little bit uncertain in this moment with the results of this week's election, as the Trump administration has sort of pointed towards revoking California and then other states' ability to participate in such a program, and sort of revoking states' rights to have more stringent standards than federal standards. So there's some significant uncertainty there. But what this program has essentially done is required manufacturers to deliver more electric vehicles, an increasing amount of clean electric vehicles to states. So the obligation in these programs is to the manufacturers. So this is a big program and really sets the stage to ensure that clean electric vehicles are available and increasingly affordable. And it's the affordable piece in strategy number 2, which is all about supporting light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicle purchase incentives, is really about ensuring that Vermonters, low-income Vermonters in particular, can avail themselves of cleaner electric vehicles for all the cost and climate benefits that they provide. So, one of our strategies has been in the initial climate action plan, recognizing that we need to provide incentives as we transition. We need to target those incentives to low and moderate income Vermonters in particular. That's what our programs have been doing. But we need long-term and consistent funding for these programs. And currently, unfortunately, we lack that long-term and consistent funding. And in fact, just recently have curtailed some of our core and most successful programs, including our electric vehicle incentive program, the Mileage Smart program, which has really been an incredibly successful program, not only to reduce climate pollution, but to help lower income Vermonters access, afford, and purchase a cleaner and electric vehicle. So we currently have expended all of the funds for those programs and a couple of others. So we really need a long-term consistent funding source so we can maintain those programs and tailor them to low and moderate income Vermonters in particular. On strategy number 2, a couple of other things I would highlight. One is looking to what we had recommended in the initial climate action plan was implementing a vehicle efficiency price adjuster, which is really meant to be at the point of sale, incentivizing, providing greater incentives for people to purchase a cleaner or electric vehicle, and sort of disincenting and putting in an equal cost on internal combustion engines, gas or diesel engines, so that we can incent people to purchase more clean vehicles. The last strategy in this bucket is implementing a high mileage user incentive program. There, as you heard and as you know well, we live in a very rural state. So the potential to maximize cost savings and carbon pollution benefits by having an incentive program that really focuses in on getting incentives for cleaner electric vehicles into the hands of people who need to drive most. It really has significant cost-saving benefits. So we are recommending Vermont exploring such a program statewide. There has been a pilot program in Burlington, and we really think that there's an opportunity to leverage cost and carbon savings from a potential statewide program. Last strategy on this page is really all about sort of educating drivers on the benefits of electrification and really sort of helping them sort of maximize the benefits of driving cleaner electric vehicles. Next slide, please. This slide is really all about, so that was about the cars. This is the same pathway, which is all about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and climate pollution from vehicles. But this is all about sort of the enabling infrastructure, the actual charging infrastructure. We have benefited from some significant federal funding through the National Electric Vehicle Incentive Program, which really was sort of helps us set the stage for making sure that public charging is accessible in communities across Vermont. So really needing to ensure that we build out the charging network that serves everyone. We've done work there. We have significant success, but we have far more to do. So a few of the actions that we are recommending or want to explore more and really want to hear from you all is aiming for more consistent electric vehicle rates across utilities to ensure equitable access and benefits for all Vermonters, so that no matter where you live, that you can, access charging and EV benefits from that charging potentially to avail yourself of electrification. We're really needing electric vehicle charging solutions for rural communities and solutions for people who rent or live in multifamily units, including a potential right to charge. We're recommending a right to charge, which means if you live in a rental unit, you live in a multifamily unit, you will have the right to install an electric vehicle charger, so exploring that solution. And these are two of the things we're going to hear from. Two of the buckets we really want to hear more from you all in terms of the solutions there. And then last big strategy in this bucket is exploring sort of establishing requirements on installers to ensure timely and ongoing maintenance of charging equipment, so that when you go to a charging station, you need to rely on charging your vehicle to get you where you need to go, that you can have confidence that that charger will work for you. So strategies relating to that. Next slide, please. So that was pathway number one. And pathway number two is really about lowering the carbon intensity of fuels. So really, this is all about, as we look to electrify as much as possible, and we also need to think about the current sort of fuels we are using and the vehicles that we have now. So how do we lower the carbon intensity of the fuels that we use, including looking at establishing a clean fuel standard like other states, like California, Washington, Oregon, I believe New York might have been considering. So this is really about a sort of standard that will clean up the fuels in existing vehicles. So those are the two big buckets of pathways that we're proposing. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all more specifics on some of those strategies and actions. Turn it over to Andrea to talk about public active and shared transportation.
Thanks, Joey. Yeah, our Pathway 3 really is all about public, active, and shared transportation. I know a lot of you joining today have a lot of input, and we've talked a lot about this, and there's good energy around this pathway. Really, it's about getting people out of single occupancy vehicles, getting out of that culture that we need to drive everywhere we need to go, and providing affordable, more health conscious travel options. So that first one there, support concentrated mixed use development patterns, really is about smart growth. So we have some actions that we are developing. I didn't list them here because they're really draft, and mostly we want to hear from you on your thoughts about this. But smart growth clearly being more about providing the opportunities for bike ped to be more successful, for transit options to be more successful than in the more rural areas. So really working with state partners and across state agencies to work together to have smarter development, understanding some of the legislation that went through last year for Act 181 and the designations for downtowns, incentivizing projects there more. Those are sort of the options and the kinds of things that we're talking about as actions underneath that strategy. So the second one there is working on capacity, regional and local capacity, to undertake transportation planning and investment in alternative modes. So some of the things that we're talking about there is there was a sustainable transportation implementation plan in the 2021 recommended actions. We need to revise some of that language. We're talking about revising that to make it a little bit more pointed. It was a lot of kind of vague language that wasn't really directed at an endpoint. And so we really want to change that language so that we have a clear direction of what that sustainable transportation implementation plan would look like. For conversations that we're having around that is, what modes do we need to focus on? What are the planning activities and the different partners that we need to coordinate with? And what funding is available to make those more successful? Increasing walking and biking to replace car travel. Again, that definitely goes hand in hand with the smart growth and being able to see the greatest transition. We want to make sure that we're emphasizing the co-benefits of that with health benefits and certainly reduced emissions from that, and just providing other options. It's not easy for everyone to own a vehicle. So we have been putting some of our carbon reduction program funds towards that, and hope to be able to continue to do that sort of investment there. Shift shipment of goods from truck to rail. That is a new one, and that is about thinking about shifting more freight from being moved only by truck and shifting and getting it into rail cars, and then using the truck for like the first last mile. So how can we do that? And working with the Agency of Transportation on their freight and rail plans to be able to do that. And then increase access to broadband to support telework. Again, just reducing vehicle trips altogether and being able to handle some part of daily life through Zoom calls and different types of telework options. That certainly has happened quite a bit since COVID, but really understanding the value and the benefits, and understanding if there's some, things that are not valuable about that, sort of some of the social impacts of that could be. So really just digging into that a little bit deeper, some of the conversations we've been having around that strategy. Back to you, Joey, right?
And we'll just need to wrap this up quickly because we're running a little late on the presentation. And thank you all.
We are really close.
Yeah.
So sort of across each pathway, like was in the 2021 adopted climate action plan, we are proposing that as a foundational recommendation or an approach. slash solution to actually make progress across each of these pathways, across each of the strategies and actions we're going to help identify with your help, is that we really need an overarching policy or policies to ensure emissions reductions in line with climate science and the Global Warming Solutions Act. So to meet our targets and raise sustainable revenue to invest in the kinds of solutions that we're going to need. So we are, right now, there is a cap and invest climate policy study being done in service of our work here together. And that will be finalized by mid-February, I believe, which is going to help us identify what a preferred policy solution might be, like a cap and invest program, as we had recommended in the initial climate action plan, or a combination of that and other things. But again, we need a consistent policy and revenue raising approach. So this is a recommendation across each of the pathways that we are putting forward. Next slide. And then really important for all of this work, grounding us is, core criteria that we will be applying to each of these is the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that these strategies and pathways and actions can achieve, sort of screening these through an equity lens, making sure that this transition in our transportation network serves everyone, and applying a cost effectiveness screen. We know that, lower income Vermonters pay a higher share of their incomes on getting where they need to go and on energy in general. We definitely need to make sure that this, our solutions and this transition is affordable and accessible to everyone. So some of the key challenges before we dig into talking with you all is we are really grappling with the sort of solutions for rural transportation electrification. Rural transportation solutions other than single occupancy vehicles. Andrea spoke to many of those things. We know that there are many co-benefits from transit, microtransit, active transportation. We definitely need to lean into those. And we are eager to hear your thoughts about solutions for multifamily units and renters. So we are, looking forward to the conversation with you. Turn it over to you, David, and let's get into it.
Love it. Okay. Thanks, Joey. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Jared, for that presentation. Okay, I'm leaving this up on the screen just for a second more so you can see some of the key challenges that this group is looking for input on. Also, we are interested in sort of overarching comments about what you've heard so far and some reactions to it, some good input that helps the subcommittee finish up its work in the next month or so in terms of recommendations up to the council in December. I'll drop these 3 things in the chat later so we can remind ourselves. Okay, so as I said, this is about having a conversation. I'm going to do 2 things as we kick it off. There's 60-something of us on the call right now. If you're able to, just in the chat real quick, just type in where you're dialing in from or where home is. Be interesting to see some of the geographic diversity that we have on this call. So in the chat, if you don't mind, just quickly throw like, where are you right now? Or where's home? Either one, that would be helpful. I'm going to do one other thing while you're doing that, folks, in that I'll ask Charlotte, we have just a quick 1-question Zoom poll also to get a sense who's in the room. And so, Charlotte, could you just throw that up for 1 second? You can see that on your screen now. It's like, what best describes your connection to climate change in the transportation sector? Again, you may have multiples. Just what best describes that connection you have to the issues we're working on here today? So just take a moment, answer that poll, and drop in the chat. Thanks everyone for putting in the chat. Like seeing those different towns where people are calling in from or zooming in from, or that they call home. Okay. We'll give it 1 more second on the poll, and then I'll just jump in. We're almost there. All right. Charlotte, can you stop the poll and just share the results? Okay, so you can see, you should be able to see this on your screen. We've got a nice range of folks on the call from business, from advocacy or civil society organizations, from the government of different levels, and just interested folks and others, right? So thanks everyone for joining. So the way we're gonna do this is in Zoom, there's a raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. It should say raise hand. Sometimes if you have an old version of Zoom, it might have something else like reactions or something, and then you have to click on that, and then the raise hand shows up. And so if you have some thoughts you'd like to share, do what like Cheryl's done and raise your hand. If you're having a hard time, go ahead and text Charlotte Goodman using the chat, and she can help you find that raise hand or let me know that you're trying to raise your hand. Two quick thoughts. Let's share the floor today, and let's be respectful of the fact that we may have very different views on this topic, right? I think Vermonters and people across the country have different views. Let's be respectful of views in the same way you want folks to be respectful of yours. All right. So I saw a hand from Cheryl, but that went down. I don't know, Cheryl, if you were trying to jump in or you change your mind. You're welcome to jump in if you'd like to. If not, we'll head over to Susan Bowen. And Susan, well, you should be able to open up your mic. There you go.
Hi, this is Susan Bowen. I'm a landlord, business owner in Vermont. I was happy to hear that one of your goals is to keep this something that isn't going to break the bank on a lot of my tenants and myself, because this is also my income and their income and their home. So as a landlord, I have units all in rural Vermont, in Bristol, and it's just nice to hear that you guys are making sure that your policies are going to be something that hopefully won't be implemented so quickly that people can't do them. And I also want to say that a lot of the people, though there are ways to buy these cars with subsidies and such, a lot of them are worried about the charging. And then the other thing is, a lot of these subsidies are regressive taxes, where I just want you to understand that a lot of policies, though they sound really good, you have to look at all the different stories, and I hope that you will continue to look at all the different stories on and how these policies may be, what's the word? I have it written down. Sorry.
That's all good.
Yeah. Oh, they have unintended consequences, and it's always good to look at all the unintended consequences of one policy over another. And that's and I have a bunch of other stories, but I know you don't have all that much time. Thank you so much for letting me speak. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I am Susan Bowen, and I own a bunch of apartments in Bristol. It's Woodland Drive Apartments, and my number is 802-999-7757. Thank you.
Great. Susan, thanks for all the information. I really appreciate the comments, and I appreciate that. I'll go next to Beth. And again, if folks want to build off what you're hearing, I'll turn back to the subcommittee members at some point if maybe they have some thoughts about what they're hearing and how those concerns might be addressed. But for now, let's keep going on hands. Beth Meacham, you're up next. You're going to need to unmute yourself, Beth, before you go. It's the Zoom dilemma for the ages. There you go.
We forget we're muted, sometimes for good reason. I want to just make a couple of observation statements. First of all, I compliment you all on your deep thinking on this subject matter. What's interesting to me is that you've not necessarily combined your thinking with other issues going on in the state, such as affordable housing and how that potentially connects to some of our needs for efficient transportation, especially in our rural areas. How do we address having more quick result charging stations at regular intervals across the state for those who are traveling long distances, and also because we are a tourism state dependent upon tourism income. Does forestry play a role in the GHG? And I'd like to say that we are an aging state, and to just target low income, I think we also need to weave into that conversation retirees who are dependent upon their Social Security income to survive. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate those comments. And I will just mention, since I look across a lot of the work that's happening in the Climate Council, some of those issues you mentioned, right? Forestry, or what about housing, right? Those are getting picked up in other places. And I'm glad you're mentioning it now because there are intersections. And I appreciate you saying that. Okay. Thanks, Beth. Cheryl Green.
Hi. Yes, I'm Cheryl, and I live in Burlington Co-Housing. We are a 32 household condominium association with intentionality, we could say. We have 2 level 2 chargers, and we have probably about 32 units and about 32 cars, and 6 of them are fully electric. And 5 years ago, a group of people who have electric cars, including Peter and me, got together to figure out how we could do this. And we worked with BED, and I am happy to report that we have been having this charging opportunity off of our common meter or house meter. So, for example, Peter and I would have to drive our car into our apartment and plug it in here if we were going to be part of the residential program. Obviously can't do that. So the idea is that we're fairly unique in that we're multifamily and our only option is to charge off a common meter. So we've worked with BED and we're in a transition again, but generally the last couple of years we've been able to do only off-peak charging and get an 11 cent or 10 cent a kilowatt hour rate rather than a 19 cent per kilowatt hour. And that off-peak takes our charging off of the common meter billing so we don't go over the monthly allotment that's needed for us to keep our rate. I'm sorry, this is a lot of weeds to go through, but it's really been quite an amazing ride. And just Peter and I have driven an electric car now. We're in our 8th year, our 2nd leaf. And it's a very exciting culture in terms of the give and take. And I know that some people see this as, oh my goodness, am I really ready to make this huge leap? And I just want to say from experience, and also know a lot of people who are seniors like us have made this in a very reasonable way and can't imagine going back. And I have more to talk about if there's time later or you're interested. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. And I actually am interested to quickly follow up with you to say, do you have then any advice or recommendations for this subcommittee, this task group, when they think about the dilemmas of multi-unit buildings? Like, is there a key learning you want to share that would be helpful as the climate plan is updated?
Yes. So one of the things I would say is incentives for actually buying the chargers and assistance in getting them installed. So we did that all ourselves and wrote a proposal to our community for $4,000 5 years ago, and it was funded. So our community made the decision to support this effort. And the idea would be that maybe we would, have more EV cars coming in. That number has remained pretty stable. A couple people have left, a couple people have come in with EV cars. But the commitment of the community was great. And what I would like to say is the woman who is speaking about being a landlord and being, what do I do about this? An incentive for offering multi-family units, level 2 chargers, if they were going to run off a common meter, for example, might be one possibility. One that I think of. So Burlington has a great residential incentive program through BED, charging only during off-peak hours. But when you can't, when you can't plug in residentially, and I don't know what the situation is with the woman who is speaking as a landlord, but this common meter challenge and opportunity, I think, is really exciting. You have to be working with a company that has the software to support what BED needs to see that you're only charging off-peak hours. I mean,
that's great. Yeah,
it's deep for sure, but it's so worth doing.
Thanks, Cheryl. I really appreciate that detail. All right, I see a whole bunch of hands up now. So here we go. Val Hughes, over to you. Excellent. So 1 second, hang on just 1 second. Let me see how this is going to work. Interpreters, are you able to help go this direction as well?
Thank you for the permission to unmute. Okay, go ahead. Hello, my name is Val Hughes. I'm a deaf and independent program coordinator in Vermont and at the Center for Independent Living. And I work all over Vermont with a variety of different types of folks, deaf people, deafblind, hard of hearing folks. So I'm curious, how would this impact the deaf community? Because most of them are low income, and how can they afford an EV car? So I know that we're trying to encourage everyone to apply, get the help to purchase the electric vehicles. Many of them are trying to get hybrids, but when you're low income, where do you get the money for that? How do you're kind of in a hard place. So most of them don't own houses. Most of them do live in apartments. So that has other issues that come up. So I know that a few, very, very few deaf people have EV cars. But they also have houses, they're retired. And so that's a positive thing, but I'm not concerned about them. I'm just thinking about all the other low income folks. So any ideas, any how do we figure that out? What's the best way?
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. And what I want to do is take one or two more comments, and then I'll ask some of the subcommittee members to respond to that question, Val, you just offered. Perfect? Okay,
Thank
great.
you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Jason, up next.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jason Hirsch. I'm a professor of anthropology at St. Michael's College. I teach economic and ecological anthropology, and I teach climate justice. Really, really glad for this session, and I'm always heartened to see the work that the State Climate Office and its subcommittees are doing for us. I just wanted to speak especially to the third pathway. I'm really heartened especially to see that there is a concrete strategy for getting folks out of their single-use cars. I think we have such a deep mentality of car dependency here in Vermont, and I think that car dependency is partly a structure, like do other solutions for transportation exist, but it's also a mindset, and I think it will take state leadership of this kind to help Vermonters be able to imagine what life looks like without being tied to a single-use car. I know people will often point to our geography, and as we've done here, our settlement patterns for obstacles to that, as obstacles to getting out of cars, or we feel kind of condemned to life in single-use cars. But the committee may know there are models of places like Vermont that have done this, like one of the best rail-connected countries in the world is Switzerland, which is an extremely rural place and much more mountainous than Vermont. And they have that there, so it doesn't need to be prohibitive for public transit. That brings us, of course, to one of the challenges that's identified here, which is what's called the last mile problem, or how people can get from a rail station to a rural residence. We're lucky in the first place that in Vermont, unlike a lot of rural places in the US, we have retained dense walkable town centers, even in really small places that actually can serve as centers for rail connections. And then those last mile problems can be solved through solutions like what Green Mountain Transit does in Montpelier right now with an on-demand vehicle. It's almost kind of like an Uber that's always operating, but in the public transit system that people can call with a phone or could call from a station or home. We can also expand electric bike parking at stations so that we can expand use of electric bikes to get to and from rail stations for those shorter trips. I think we need to remember in terms of car dependency that car ownership used to be really a luxury and was only the way people use kind of like private planes now. And that's partly because the cost of cars has dropped, but that's changed. But it's also because there was a transportation infrastructure where getting around was treated as a collective responsibility. And I think that we could go back there or go forward to there. And lastly, I'll just say that this is a low income sensitive approach, an inclusive approach, because I think Vermonters just sort of write off the cost of car ownership until you can't afford a car, and then it looms enormously large how necessary it has come to be in the state to have this huge expense. But owning a car is extremely expensive, and it's something that we should take on collectively and not put on each other. So just as a little thought experiment, I just did some math here, and if every Vermonter, it's not realistic, but traded in their car based on the average cost of car ownership for a year, we would generate $5 billion a year for a public transit fund, which could build us a system that is just the envy of the world and would totally work for our rural state. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate those comments. Let's do one more, and then I'm going to turn to some subcommittee members, both for the specific question Val had, but other quick reactions, and then I'll pick it back up with Amanda. But Rob, over to you.
Yes, I'm Rob Kidd with the Vermont chapter of the Sierra Club. I appreciate all the work the subcommittee is doing and the folks in the agency, the legislative leaders, but it really is going to come down to how much of our financial commitments we're going to put towards this. Are we going to meet the challenges by putting our money where our mouth is? You see the agency of transportation, the transportation budget, I think last year came up to $870 million, but you see us fighting every year for nickels and pennies to pay for these sustainability programs. And I know there's some good work with the treasurer's office to look at paying it, but let's get our budget aligned to our values. Somebody talked about EV incentives, about how we're going to pay for those. Well, the EV incentive programs are gone. We keep trying to get more money for transit. We get told we're spending too much money and there's not more, and we're cutting routes. So we need to actually make the priorities with our budgets going towards these programs so that people can transition out of the car dependent or the gas guzzling dependent economy. So that's what I want to see. I want to see something from the climate action plan saying how we're going to align our budget to the needs of our equity goals and our climate goals.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate those comments.
But I won't.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Amanda, if you can hold on for just 1 second, if you don't mind, and it's good to see you. Folks who are on the subcommittee, there was a very specific question about low-income folks, specifically around the deaf community, but low-income folks in general. Like, how do they experience this transition to electric vehicles? Like, what's envisioned for the low-income community in this transition to electrification? So I don't know, Andrea or Joey or other members of or Jared or other folks who are here from the task group, if you want to just chime in on that question specifically, and then if there's other things you want to jump in quickly, I'm happy to hear that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted, to respond to Val's very good and very important question. So one of the recommendations that we're working with is making sure that there's sufficient incentives, especially for Vermonters with lower incomes, to be able to access more efficient and cleaner transportation that reduces transportation costs over time. So right now, there are federal tax credits that rather than being rebates that you can get upfront. That was an important change because it used to just be that you had to have a tax liability to be able to access these rebates. That's no longer the case. We will see what happens with that in the future. There's also federal tax credits currently for used vehicles. About 2/3 of Vermonters are buying used vehicles rather than new vehicles. Again, we'll see what happens with that at the federal level, given the result of the elections. What we have more control over is the incentive programs here at the state level. And there have historically been programs that are very focused on providing most of the incentive dollars to lower income Vermonters, especially through programs like Mileage Smart and Replace Your Ride. So we've gotten some data from the state and from Drive Electric Vermont, and what we've seen is that to date, 71% of all the state funding issued for EV incentives has gone to lower income Vermonters. There's kind of two categories of incentives. There's standard incentives and enhanced incentives, and those enhanced incentives are for lower income Vermonters, and they are at a much higher level or a significantly higher level than the standard incentive. So that feedback that you're providing is really important. It's something that we recognize needs to happen. There need to be higher incentives for lower income folks to be able to afford new and used, more efficient and electric vehicles. I think the biggest challenge is going to be on the funding side, where that comes from, given the likely changes at the federal level. But that makes it all the more important that we look at these recommendations like around cap and invest, so that there can be sustainable revenue for higher and targeted incentives to support Vermonters with lower incomes. There's also important things around charging access that Joey mentioned earlier, in terms of right to charge, in terms of charging access for renters who may not have access to a garage, or who have street parking. Important programs there and examples there to recognize that it's not just vehicle access, but it's also charging access. So those are a couple of the key things.
Thanks, Jared. That's helpful clarification. I appreciate you doing that. Let's jump back to the hands, and then we can see if there's some more things we can do a little back and forth. Amanda Carlson, over to you.
David, nice to see you too. It's been a while. Hi everyone. My name is Amanda Carlson, and I manage a small transportation venture called Community Rides Vermont, which is based out of Barrie. And we are fortunate enough to receive funding from the state of Vermont to run a pilot program called Mobility for All. And so we're a quasi public transit provider, our company is, but we also provide taxi-like services to the general public, and are also a contract transportation provider for our local schools, for example. So in our fleet of vehicles is all electric. So I have some feedback to give about that. But more specifically, in terms of this subcommittee's goals to think of ways rural community members don't have to own their own vehicle, I think that our pilot project will have some interesting lessons to be shared with our other public transit providers statewide, in terms of how we can serve those people who don't have cars, and potentially create an environment where people can become less reliant on their own vehicles. So the public transit system does a pretty good job at meeting most people's needs that don't have vehicles and can't drive for whatever reason, but there are still folks and use cases that fall through the cracks. So I think having this Mobility for All funding stream that we have will be really important to implement statewide. So I wholly support more money for public transit. And then B, I really support enhanced incentives for public transit and other transportation companies to electrify, because our vehicles are on the road all day, every day. And as we've experienced with our fleet for the past 18 months, the benefits of electrification in terms of cost, reliability, pollution reduction are great, and getting other businesses to electrify would provide a lot of cost savings and pollution reduction, as you all probably know. So big supporter of that. And as a private citizen, I give my full support for equitable electric charging rates statewide. I know as a consumer, as a GMP customer, it's a great program, but when I talk to family members in the kingdom, just like in terms of the EV incentives they can pull down, or we're able formerly, I guess currently able to pull down compared to GMP, it's not consistent statewide. So I think that would be a really great development. And I think that's all I got to share. So thanks for your good work.
Thanks, Amanda. And to the extent there are lessons from the pilot that are written down and you want to share those over, I'm sure the subcommittee would be interested to see those. Okay, Jonathan Weber, you're up next.
Thanks. Jonathan Weber, I'm with Local Motion. We're a statewide advocacy group for walking, biking, and rolling. And so I totally agree with and loved Jason's comment, but it was really well said, and also Rob's comment. And I think that we as a state will need more resources to tackle this problem of emissions in the transportation sector. And yet, as Rob said, we also do have a pretty massive transportation budget. And I think there is a lot of room within that budget to spend money on projects that shift people away from car usage in a way that we're just not doing now. And so what other states have done to move their DOTs in that direction is to implement essentially a cap on the greenhouse gas emissions or VMT increases that can result from big transportation projects. And it's essentially a planning rule where if you're doing a big transportation project, it has to be evaluated for its effect on greenhouse gas emissions or vehicle miles traveled. And then if it is going to increase VMT or greenhouse gas emissions, those have to be mitigated elsewhere, or the project has to be changed in order to go in the direction of the goal. So Colorado has this in place. It's a really effective mechanism to ensure that our state's transportation budget is moving us towards the goals that we want to see as opposed to away from them. So I think the current climate action plan talks about a sustainable transportation plan that would look at VMT reduction and what's needed to achieve that in terms of investments. I would really encourage that we amend that idea to specifically mention exploring a planning rule, a regulatory scheme that gets at the kind of mechanism that I'm just talked about. So I'll include a link in the chat that sort of looks at what Colorado has done specifically.
Nice. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the idea. Representative Phil Poach, and I'm going to mispronounce your last name. I apologize.
Poach. Yeah, close enough. Hi, everybody. I just want to thank everybody for this great comments and this good information and this very productive process. Just a couple things. I go along with Rob and the others that financing some of these things are going to be a real challenge. I should say also I work on the House Transportation Committee. So that will be a real challenge, but I think we've got to make sure what we do as far as financing, that we look at it as investments, because many of these are. If we can put a lower income family in an electric vehicle, overcome all the challenges associated with being able to do that, we know they're going to save money in the same way if we convert their oil burners to, air heat pumps. They're going to save money. So we really need to be looking at these as investments and with those through that lens. Just a couple of sort of minor things. I'm glad to hear the good data on focusing these incentives for lower income, that it is working toward lower income. But I think for myself, I also am hoping we look at the high users too. So we get the biggest bang for the buck. If I get an incentive as a retired person, forget the state house, I get an incentive for an electric vehicle, but I'm only driving 4,000 miles a year, it's not giving the payback. So those heavy users. And the last thing is something I don't have any real data on, but we did hear that there are some challenges for homes, single family homes, and perhaps some apartments and whatnot when they go to upgrade their electrical services for electric vehicle charging or electrification of their heating system. There's a real challenge, and perhaps we should be looking at the utilities to provide a minimum level at each household, and not, require that household to upgrade a line from, half a mile away to get just 100 amp service or something. So I don't know how big of a problem that is, but that'd be something we'd want to make sure we have as part of our strategy. So thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. Keith, you're up next. Come in.
Hello, yes. Yeah, I'm Keith Cubbin with Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. I do transportation and emergency management planning here. I just wanted to speak up to the limitations of the grid, at least in our region. We've got either 9 towns or at least portions of 9 towns that are limited in both, installing new solar, but even if you were to add too many new EVs due to the substation that serves that region, uh, doesn't have the thermal capacity to actually be adding these pieces in. So, I mean, it doesn't matter until that is fixed. It doesn't matter how much we promote. We can't actually bring that much more online there. And I mean, and WEC actually doesn't even have on-demand metering. Anyways, that service isn't even available within that footprint for that utility. So trying to get all our utilities playing on the same level is going to be need to be a primary goal, where we can't even achieve that. So I'm wanting to address that.
Thanks, Keith. So glad you brought that up. Thanks for sharing that in the specific example there. Adams Carroll. Adams, if you're there, feel free to take yourself off mute. There you go. Yep.
Hi, my name is Adams Carroll. I'm the Executive Director of Advanced Transit. We're a public transit provider in White River Junction and Norwich in Vermont. I'm also here, I guess, officially, unofficially, on behalf of the Vermont Public Transit Association, which I'm the secretary. And this is a conversation, obviously, we're very interested in. We, at Advanced Transit, we have now 4 heavy-duty electric buses and about a year and a half experience operating them, and we're excited to keep on going down that path. There was a comment earlier about funding for public transportation and the situation that many of the operators in the state find themselves in, having to look carefully at their routes and in some cases cut service, which is of course not the place that any of us want to be in. I do want to commend Vermont for being, especially among rural states, really very forward thinking and progressive in providing state funding for public transportation. But I just want to make it kind of stated that for all of our routes, the majority of our funding is federal, comes through federal grants. And in order to receive those federal grants, we need to have local match funds. Much of those local match funds are contributed by the state, but also a significant portion is contributed by local communities, in some cases private institutions, even ski resorts. But from year to year, it's not really easy to predict what sort of local match is going to be available from all those different sources. And that puts us in a hard place when we're trying to think about expanding routes or increase frequency or anything like that, because the last thing we want to do is put a great new service out on the street and have somebody make a decision about where they live or where they take a job, and then not be able to continue it in year 2 or year 3 because we don't have a reliable kind of ongoing source of match funding available to continue to receive those grants. And I think many of us in the public transit industry are kind of like really grateful for all the support we receive, but also would feel like we would be able to provide a higher quality of service if there was a more predictable and recurring source of that local match funding. And I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Adams. I appreciate the comment. Sophia.
Hi, everyone. Sophia Donforth, Director of the Vermont Energy Education Program, here to talk about our interactions with K-12 students all across the state in this space. We spend a lot of time doing hands-on learning with and talking to students about things like our transportation choices. And we're hearing from kids of all ages that they know it's good news to walk and bike and that that's a fun thing to do. But that there are lots of places where that's not okay to do. And sometimes that's about the kind of road or sidewalk situation, and sometimes that's about who's around. But there's widespread acceptance of those active modes of transportation amongst these younger folks. And then when we start talking about public transit, it's just not an option for so many kids. And so looking at what's been shared today, I would just like to really emphasize the need for there to be a system built that actually works, reliably for a whole lot of folks and that is accessible for a whole lot of folks, because it's true that we need to shift our car culture assumptions. And that's part of what we're trying to do by talking to kids as young as kindergarten. But if they don't see that there's actually a viable option for them to take in a local bus, then there isn't really anywhere for that conversation to go or any way for them to practice the skills involved in taking that bus. I know that has to look really different depending on where you are in the state, right? My children here in Burlington will take the city bus, which is the school bus. So we have that set up for us. And it will have to look really different other places. But Amanda Carlson has pointed out that she's got something else working in Barrie, and I just think we need a systematic approach that actually makes that a viable option for people all over the place. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophia. Appreciate that. Katie?
Hi, thank you. Katie Gallagher. I direct the Sustainable Communities Program with the Vermont Natural Resources Council and also help to coordinate the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition. And I really appreciate this conversation and a lot of the comments that have been made, and just wanted to highlight the importance that we've seen of local capacity in particular, but also regional capacity to support municipalities in transportation planning, and just to kind of call out particularly for implementing biking and walking infrastructure. A lot of that comes down to municipalities to do and to plan for. And in some cases, we are not taking advantage of existing opportunities to do that work where, for example, there might be a street that's already being repaved and there could be bike lanes that are added in. But if a town hasn't done that pre-planning work in coordination with the Agency of Transportation, that project might not be done. And even for our relatively quote unquote larger towns, that is still the case where there's generally not dedicated transportation expertise or staffing. And so we also kind of end up in this situation where municipalities are both responsible for that transportation infrastructure and making those investment decisions, but they're also having to deal with increased costs related to their existing road maintenance, which is now, becoming more expensive as we see more impacts from climate and storms, et cetera. And so then it becomes kind of a fight between public works and select boards and city councils and so forth. So just want to highlight that any kind of statewide decisions that are trying to, increase incentives or other opportunities for towns to implement also really need to make sure that those towns have the capacity and the resources to do that planning work.
Nice. Thanks, Katie. All right, so I wanted to do two things before we finish up today in our call. One is folks who are on the task group or the subcommittee that want to chime in and maybe provide a little bit more detail on some of the things that you heard questions about or interests about. I'll just open up that space. So Andrea, Joey, Jared, others, if there's something you want to make sure folks are aware of that you're working on based on this conversation, feel free to chime in now. Let's just take a quick pause if there's anything that you all wanted to weigh in on as we're finishing up.
Yeah, I can do that. Just really related to Katie's last comments there. And in the slide for providing more options, the vehicle miles traveled reduction slide, and talking about planning and investments and working together to enhance local and regional planning. We definitely saw that as something when we went to put more carbon reduction program funds into our bike ped program this year, that there wasn't a big pot to draw from that would really go for what those program funds are meant for, to reduce carbon emissions. So we do want to reach out and do some planning and work with communities to get those sort of bigger win projects planned and implemented. We also, you talked about if there's a paving project or another infrastructure project going through, how we can work with them. I know you probably know about the bike ped integration pilot program and just working with communities to do that upfront planning so that it can be identified really early on, and those other infrastructure projects that when those projects are coming, there is an opportunity to incorporate active transportation into those. So, yeah.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay. Joey and then Bram. Yeah.
Oh, I would just follow up and say I just very much appreciate everyone's thoughts, ideas, recommendations, and would welcome as much specificity as possible, and other thoughts and recommendations. So this is like our due diligence gathering phase, really important. And then also, side note on the transit and microtransit, may want to potentially lean into a couple of you to go deeper on understanding the challenges at this moment. I think Adams and maybe some others had sort of articulated that, and the microtransit program in particular, that sort of the Gopher-like model that could fill sort of some niche or gaps in the current. So just noting that this has been extremely helpful, and we're continuing to do our due diligence, but your ongoing insights, thoughts, and as much specific sort of input as possible, like the planning piece, Katie, 100%. Like, what is that sort of potential recommendation we can and should be thinking about considering and potentially recommending to the cross-sector and then ultimately to the council. So I've put in my council email and then the ANR general email. Please provide further input as you are able. This has been extremely helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bram, sorry.
Two quick things. First of all, thanks to ASL interpreter Hilda for her outstanding simultaneous translation. Deep gratitude. And second, addressing just the part of electrifying personal cars, I want to say that to relative to low income, very aware that as with weatherization of homes and heat pumps, once you get over the initial investment hurdle, the maintenance and operating costs are lower, but the initial investment hurdle is really high. And as I said, we are very aware and sensitive to that, recognize that we have to find ways to address that to make all of these accessible to everyone in the state.
Thanks, Bram. Yeah. Okay, I got one last thing to do here, all of us together, and because we're a big number on the phone, and I really appreciate everyone's comments. And here's a quick opportunity to write a short phrase, and I'm going to drop in the chat something. If you are tech savvy enough, you'll follow me with this. It's a quick link to a Mentipoll, and what this allows you to do is write a short phrase that answers the question you'll see on your screen, which is, what's one key piece of advice right? What's one key aspect of this that you want to make sure the subcommittee takes away from this process? And I will, when I start to see stuff come in, I will start to show the responses as you write them. It's really great to do a very short phrase because then it's easier for everybody to see. So, based on the conversation just now, what is one piece of input that jumps out as particularly important for this subcommittee? So I'll give it a second. I'll start to share my screen as I see stuff come up. I see someone managed to get some stuff in, so thank you. Thanks, folks. I see stuff coming in. You click right on that Menti and you should just be able to start writing. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. You should be able to see. All right. Public transportation. Make the switching easier. If you build it, they'll come. Charging stations, multifamily, and across the state. Strategic and specific investments. Active transportation, transit. Culture change. The electric grid. Stabilizing funding for public transit, right? I'm reading the same way you are. Great. This is great. Okay. So as these pop in, obviously I'll collect all this and make it part of the summary that's going to be sent over to the subcommittee. I wanted to talk a second about next steps here as we close up. Thanks everyone for these. Keep sending them in. They'll be included in the meeting summary. It's really helpful. I appreciate this sort of clarity of message. All right. So next steps. Let me grab my other screen. Just give me a sec. All right. There's a number of these sessions going on, and you can always check that at the calendar, which is this second bullet here. Public input sessions, as well as meetings of the subcommittees, the council, etc. The council has a meeting in 2 weeks, and we'll be looking at a summary of a lot of this input and the other input that's coming in. So we're trying to really feed this in not only to the task groups and the subcommittees, but already up to the council itself. Feel free to attend that meeting in a couple weeks. There are ways to sign up, and maybe I can get someone from the Climate Action Office who's on the call right now to throw some of these links into the chat. I'm not quite capable enough to share the screen and do that. But if we could throw some of these links to sign up for the Climate Action Office newsletter, there's a public comment form that folks can use. And we can throw these on, there we go. Liz Amler's throwing these in the chat. The comment form sign up as well is right there on the website. And those are other ways to reach out. Joey Miller and others have put their contact information in the Zoom as well. So feel free to reach out to those folks as well. All right. So I want to thank everyone for today's conversation. I'll do another thanks to our interpreters here. Thanks for your work, and thanks for folks joining. I think that's it for today. Andrea, right, if there's anything else you'd like to say, I'm happy to turn it over to you for any last words.
No, thank you. I think I don't have any last words. There's a lot to talk about here, and we could go on for days talking about all of this. And I just really appreciate all the input and the comments in the chat as well. And like Joey said, we will look to follow up with some of you as a task group, but if you have comments, please do forward those, and the more specificity that you can provide, the better. And just hearing different stories is really valuable. That is going to be part of the 2025 Climate Action Plan, and definitely liked hearing some particular stories today through this input. So thanks for that.
All right. So with that, I think we'll end today's meeting. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Take care, and all the best.